The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp white paper bearing the embossed seal of Whitmore Academy. I held it with trembling fingers, reading the words I had dreamed of for 3 years. We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance into our doctoral program in educational psychology. But the triumph felt hollow. This wasn't about academic achievement anymore. It hadn't been since the day Professor Dr. James Whitmore destroyed my mentor's career, and, by extension, my own future. I remembered that day with crystalline clarity. Dr. Sarah Kim, my beloved advisor at the State University, had been presenting groundbreaking research on cultural bias in standardized testing. The work was revolutionary, promising to reshape how educators approached assessment for minority students. I had spent 2 years as Dr. Kim's research assistant, pouring my heart into data collection and analysis. Then came the conference where everything unraveled. Dr. Whitmore, already a towering figure in educational psychology, had risen during the Q&A session. His questions seemed innocuous at first, methodological inquiries that any rigorous academic might pose. But I recognized the predatory gleam in his eyes, the way he circled Dr. Kim's work like a shark scenting blood. "Dr. Kim," he had said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in academia. "While your conclusions are interesting, I find your methodology fundamentally flawed. The sample size inadequate, the cultural variables insufficiently controlled." What followed was 20 minutes of systematic destruction. Whitmore dismantled Dr. Kim's research piece by piece, his critique so devastating that whispers began immediately in the audience. By the time he finished, Dr. Kim's face had gone ashen, her hands shaking as she attempted to respond. I had watched from the back of the auditorium, my own dreams crumbling as I witnessed my mentor's professional execution. The research we had worked on together, research that could have helped thousands of students like myself, immigrants and minorities struggling in an educational system that didn't understand them, was being dismissed as amateur hour. But the true betrayal came 6 months later. Dr. Whitmore published his own paper on cultural bias in standardized testing. I recognized the framework immediately. It was Dr. Kim's work, refined and expanded, with Whitmore's name as the sole author. He had taken everything, the theoretical foundation, key insights, even some of the specific examples Dr. Kim had used in her presentation. Dr. Kim tried to fight it. She submitted complaints to academic journals, reached out to colleagues, even considered legal action. But Whitmore's reputation was unassailable, his connections vast and deep. Who would believe that the distinguished Dr. James Whitmore, holder of endowed chairs at 2 prestigious universities, had stolen ideas from a little-known professor at a state school? The stress destroyed Dr. Kim. She developed insomnia, then depression. Her other research projects stalled as she became consumed with proving the theft. The university, uncomfortable with the controversy, quietly suggested she might be happier elsewhere. Dr. Kim resigned a year later, broken and bitter, abandoning academia altogether. I had graduated with my master's degree into a world that suddenly seemed much smaller. Without Dr. Kim's guidance and reputation, the doctoral programs that had once seemed within reach became impossible dreams. Whitmore's theft hadn't just destroyed my mentor, it had stolen my future too. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of working dead-end jobs, of watching my dreams fade while Whitmore continued to build his empire on stolen ground. 3 years of nurturing a cold, patient anger that had crystallized into something harder and more focused than mere hatred. Now, holding the acceptance letter to Whitmore's own program, I felt the pieces of my plan clicking into place. I had spent those 3 years not just in bitterness, but in preparation. I had published papers in obscure journals, built a modest but respectable academic profile, and most importantly, I had learned everything there was to know about Dr. James Whitmore. I knew about his alcoholism, carefully hidden behind faculty meetings and academic conferences. I knew about his estranged relationship with his daughter, whom he had emotionally neglected in pursuit of his career. I knew about his upcoming book deal, worth 7 figures, based on research that wasn't entirely his own. And I knew about the many other scholars whose work had mysteriously found its way into his publications over the years. I had become a collector of Whitmore's sins, and now I was ready to make him pay. Whitmore Academy felt like stepping into a cathedral of privilege. Gothic architecture stretched toward autumn skies, and students moved across manicured lawns with the casual confidence of those who had never doubted their place in the world. I walked among them, my acceptance letter tucked safely in my bag, feeling like an insurgent in enemy territory. Dr. Whitmore's office occupied the top floor of the psychology building, a testament to his status within the academic hierarchy. When I knocked on his door for our first meeting, I found myself face to face with the man who had haunted my thoughts for 3 years. He was older than I remembered, his hair now completely silver, but his presence remained commanding. Those same pale eyes that had eviscerated Dr. Kim's work now studied me with clinical interest. "Ms. Chen," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "your application was quite impressive. Tell me, what draws you to educational psychology?" I had rehearsed this moment countless times, but sitting across from him, I felt my carefully constructed composure waver. This was the man who had destroyed my mentor, who had stolen work that could have changed thousands of lives. The temptation to confront him directly was almost overwhelming. Instead, I smiled. I'm passionate about addressing educational inequities, particularly for underrepresented students. I believe assessment bias is one of the most significant barriers to academic success for minority populations. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting. That's an area I've done considerable work in myself. Are you familiar with my recent publications? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I felt the blood roar in my ears, but I kept my voice steady. Yes, I've read your work extensively, particularly your paper on cultural variables in standardized assessment. It was illuminating. I'm glad you found it valuable, Whitmore said, leaning back in his chair. Too few scholars appreciate the complexity of that research. It took years to develop the theoretical framework. Liar. I bit back the word, forcing myself to nod appreciatively instead. I can imagine. The depth of insight is remarkable. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the role of eager student. I attended every lecture, participated in every discussion, and slowly began to establish myself as one of Whitmore's most promising advisees. I was careful to be impressive without being threatening, brilliant without being competitive. But beneath the surface, I was gathering intelligence. I learned that Whitmore ran his research lab like a personal fiefdom. Graduate students worked on projects he assigned, often spending months or years developing ideas that would ultimately be published under his name alone. The most promising students found themselves caught in a web of dependency, their careers entirely reliant on his approval and recommendations. I watched him operate with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. In seminars, he would casually present ideas that I recognized from other scholars' work, weaving them into his lectures as if they were his own insights. When students questioned the origin of certain concepts, he would smile indulgently and speak of the collaborative nature of academic thought. The other graduate students seemed oblivious to the pattern, too caught up in their own survival to see the larger picture. But I saw everything, the way Whitmore would guide promising research in directions that suited his own agenda, the way he subtly discouraged students from presenting their work at conferences until it was fully developed under his supervision. 3 months into the program, I made my first move. I had been working on a research proposal about implicit bias in teacher evaluations, work that built naturally on the foundation Dr. Kim had established years earlier. During a meeting with Whitmore, I presented my preliminary findings with carefully calculated excitement. "This is fascinating work," Whitmore said, studying my data. "The implications could be significant." "Thank you, Dr. Whitmore. I was hoping to present some of these findings at the upcoming Educational Psychology Conference." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I think that might be premature. This research needs more development, more rigorous analysis. Perhaps we should work on it together, refine the methodology." I nodded eagerly, even as my heart hammered with anticipation. That would be incredible. I would be honored to collaborate with you. Over the following weeks, I watched as Whitmore slowly began to appropriate my work. He suggested improvements that aligned the research more closely with his own previous publications. He recommended changes to the theoretical framework that would make him a natural co-author. He praised my insights while subtly repositioning them as extensions of his own thinking. I documented everything. I kept detailed records of my meetings, saved every email, recorded my conversations when possible. I was building a case, brick by brick, evidence by evidence. But the hardest part wasn't gathering proof. It was maintaining my facade. Sitting across from Whitmore, smiling and nodding as he stole my work just as he had stolen Dr. Kim's, required a level of emotional control that left me exhausted. Some nights I would return to my apartment and scream into pillows, the rage and frustration of my situation threatening to consume me. I thought often of Dr. Kim, now working as a high school counselor in a small town, her dreams of academic research abandoned. The injustice of it burned like acid in my veins. But I also thought of all the other victims, the graduate students whose careers had been stunted, the scholars whose work had been appropriated, the research that had been delayed or diverted for Whitmore's personal gain. 6 months into my doctoral program, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Kim appeared at my apartment one evening, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "I heard you were here," Dr. Kim said quietly, "at Whitmore Academy." We sat in my small living room, the weight of shared history heavy between us. "I know what you're thinking," Dr. Kim continued, "but revenge won't bring back what we lost. It won't undo the damage." I studied my former mentor's face, seeing the defeat that had settled there like dust. "What would you have me do? Pretend it never happened? Let him continue destroying other people's lives?" "I would have you be careful," Dr. Kim said. "James Whitmore is more dangerous than you know. He's not just a thief, he's a predator, and predators are most dangerous when they're cornered." After Dr. Kim left, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was harder than it had been a year ago, marked by the weight of my deception. I wondered if my plan was changing me into someone I wouldn't recognize, someone as ruthless as Whitmore himself. But then I thought of all the students who would benefit from Dr. Kim's original research, all the minds that could be saved from the biases embedded in educational systems. I thought of the next Dr. Kim, somewhere out there, whose work might be stolen if Whitmore wasn't stopped. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. I had work to do. The breakthrough came during my second year in the program, buried in the archives of the university library. I had been researching historical approaches to educational assessment when I stumbled across a dissertation from 1987, 35 years old, written by a doctoral student named Margaret Foster. As I read Foster's work, my blood turned to ice. The theoretical framework was identical to one Whitmore had published in 1989, the one that had established his early reputation in the field. Not similar, identical. Even some of the language was word for word the same. Margaret Foster's dissertation had been approved in May 1987. Whitmore's paper had been published in the Journal of Educational Psychology in March 1989. The timing was perfect for theft, long enough after Foster's graduation to ensure she would be forgotten, but recent enough for the ideas to seem fresh and original. My hands shook as I printed the relevant pages. This wasn't just another case of academic appropriation. This was the foundation of Whitmore's entire career. Everything he had built, every accolade and position, was constructed on stolen ground. I spent the next week tracking down Margaret Foster. The trail was cold. Foster had left academia shortly after graduation, married, changed her name, and disappeared into suburban anonymity. I finally found her in Phoenix, working as a corporate trainer for a medical device company. The phone call was difficult. Margaret Foster, now Margaret Williams, was initially suspicious, then defensive, then heartbreakingly resigned when I explained what I had discovered. "I tried to fight it," Margaret said, her voice thick with decades-old pain. "I contacted the journal, filed complaints with the university, but Whitmore was already established, already respected. I was nobody. They treated me like I was delusional, like I was trying to claim credit for his brilliance. What did you do? A long pause. I gave up. I was 26, broke, exhausted from fighting a system that didn't believe me. I had offers from consulting firms, good money, a chance to start over. So I took it. I never looked back. Until now? Until now, Margaret agreed quietly. You said you have evidence? Proof that he's still doing this? I thought of my carefully compiled files, the documentation of Whitmore's systematic theft over the past year. I have evidence, but I need your help to make it stick. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by papers and files, constructing what felt like a complex legal brief. I had documentation of Whitmore's theft of Dr. Kim's work, evidence of his appropriation of my own research, and now the smoking gun of Margaret Foster's dissertation. The pattern was clear and damning, but as I worked, doubt crept in. Dr. Kim's warnings echoed in my mind. Predators are most dangerous when they are cornered. I knew that revealing the truth about Whitmore would be academic suicide for me as well. I would be branded a troublemaker, someone who bit the hand that fed her. Even if I was vindicated, my career would be over before it began. The academic world valued stability and hierarchy above justice. I thought about my parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. They had been so proud when I was accepted to Whitmore Academy, had called relatives in Korea to brag about their daughter's success. How could I explain that I was about to throw it all away for the sake of revenge? But then I opened my laptop and read Dr. Kim's latest email. My former mentor was considering leaving her counseling job too, the stress of working in education, even at the high school level, too much to bear. The theft of her life's work had poisoned her entire relationship with the field she had once loved. I made my decision. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Whitmore. I found him in his office, grading papers with the casual authority of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. Maya, he said warmly, what can I do for you? I sat across from him, studying his face for perhaps the last time. I wanted to discuss my dissertation proposal. I've been thinking about historical patterns in educational assessment theory. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Caution, perhaps. Or calculation. That's a broad topic, he said carefully. What specific angle interests you? I'm particularly interested in cases where foundational research might have been overlooked, lost to history. Now the change in his demeanor was unmistakable. The warmth faded from his smile, replaced by something colder and more watchful. Academic history is full of forgotten contributions, he said. That's the nature of scholarship. Ideas build on other ideas. Attribution becomes complex. I nodded as if I agreed. I came across an interesting dissertation from 1987 by Margaret Foster. Some of her theoretical framework seems remarkably prescient, given later developments in the field. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Whitmore set down his pen with deliberate care. Ms. Chen, he said, his voice dropping to a register I had never heard before. I think you should be very careful about the direction your research takes. Academic careers are fragile things. Reputation is everything in this field. The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I also felt a surge of vindication. His reaction confirmed everything I suspected. Of course, I said, standing to leave. I wouldn't want to pursue anything that might be professionally unwise. As I reached the door, Whitmore spoke again. Maya, I've been very pleased with your work here. You have a bright future ahead of you. It would be a shame to see that derailed by poor judgment. That evening, I called Margaret Foster and Dr. Kim. It was time to move to the final phase of my plan. The email went out on a Tuesday morning, precisely 3 years after I had first received my acceptance letter to Whitmore Academy. The subject line was simple: a pattern of academic appropriation, evidence, and documentation. I had spent months crafting the message, ensuring that every fact was verified, every claim was supported by documentation. I had attached Margaret Foster's original dissertation, alongside Whitmore's 1989 paper, Dr. Kim's conference presentation with timestamps and audio recordings, and my own research notes with documentation of Whitmore's systematic appropriation. The recipient list was carefully curated: department heads, journal editors, professional organizations, journalists who covered academia. I knew that once I pressed send, there would be no turning back. My academic career would be over, my reputation destroyed. Whitmore would make sure of that. But I had made peace with the sacrifice. The response was swift and devastating. Within hours, my inbox was flooded with replies. Some were supportive, expressing shock and promising investigation. Others were hostile, accusing me of pursuing a vendetta against a respected scholar. The academic world, it seemed, was as divided as I had expected. Dr. Whitmore's response was more personal. He appeared at my apartment that evening, his usual composure cracked and dangerous. I had been expecting him, but seeing him in my doorway, the careful mask of civility stripped away, still sent a jolt of fear through me. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, pushing past me into the apartment. 30 years of work, of building something meaningful, and you want to tear it down for what? Some misguided sense of justice? I closed the door and turned to face him. Justice isn't misguided, it's overdue. Whitmore laughed, but there was no humor in it. Justice? You think this is about justice? This is about your ego, your need to be the hero of your own little story. You've destroyed more than just my career today. I've exposed the truth, something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you. His face darkened. The truth? The truth is that ideas don't belong to anyone. Academic work is collaborative, evolutionary. Every scholar builds on the work of others. The only difference is that some of us have the vision to see where those ideas can lead, the skill to develop them into something meaningful. You stole Margaret Foster's entire theoretical framework. I refined it. I gave it the development and platform it deserved. Do you think her work would have had any impact if it had remained buried in some university archive? I made it matter. I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the twisted logic that had allowed him to rationalize decades of theft. In his mind, he wasn't a thief. He was a curator, selecting worthy ideas and giving them the attention they deserved. And Dr. Kim's work, my research, were you just curating those too? Whitmore's expression hardened. Dr. Kim was a mediocre researcher who stumbled onto something interesting. Without my guidance, her work would have been forgotten within a year. As for your research, he laughed again, that bitter sound. You're a graduate student. Everything you do is under my supervision. That's how the system works. The system is broken. The system is the only thing standing between chaos and progress. Do you think academic advancement happens by accident? Do you think knowledge develops itself? It requires hierarchy, requires someone to make the difficult decisions about what research deserves support and development. I realized I was looking at a man who had convinced himself that his crimes were noble, that his theft was actually a form of service. The self-deception was so complete, so absolute, that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Get out, I said quietly. Whitmore studied me for a long moment, and I saw something like respect flicker in his eyes. You know this will destroy you too. You'll never work in academia again. No one will trust you. No one will hire you. You've just thrown away your entire future for the sake of revenge. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. After he left, I sat in my darkened apartment and waited. I knew the worst was yet to come. The investigation took 8 months. During that time, I lived in a strange limbo, neither student nor whistleblower, watched by the academic community with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some days I felt like Joan of Arc, others like a pariah. The university's response was predictably cautious. They commissioned an internal review while distancing themselves from both me and Whitmore. The press coverage was more aggressive, with several journalists digging deeper into Whitmore's publication history and finding additional cases of questionable attribution. Margaret Foster flew in from Phoenix to testify before the ethics committee. I watched the older woman speak with quiet dignity about her stolen work, about the career that had been derailed by Whitmore's theft. It was the first time Foster had told her story publicly, and I could see how much it cost her. Dr. Kim provided testimony as well, though she was reluctant to participate. The years since the theft had worn her down, and she seemed almost fragile as she recounted the destruction of her research and career. But her documentation was thorough, and her account was devastating. My own role in the investigation was complex. I was both whistleblower and victim, both hero and cautionary tale. Some committee members clearly viewed me as a troublemaker who had violated the unspoken rules of academic hierarchy. Others saw me as someone who had shown remarkable courage in exposing a pattern of systematic abuse. The personal cost was enormous. My relationships with other graduate students became strained and awkward. Some supported me quietly, but others viewed me as a traitor who had violated the sacred bond between student and mentor. The academic job market, already competitive, became impossible. Word spread quickly through the small world of educational psychology that Maya Chen was difficult, someone who couldn't be trusted. But I also received unexpected support. Other scholars began reaching out, sharing their own stories of appropriated work and stolen credit. A network of victims and supporters formed around my case, creating a broader conversation about power dynamics and exploitation in academic research. The final report was released on a Friday afternoon in March, timing designed to minimize media coverage. The committee found evidence of systematic patterns of inappropriate attribution and failure to provide adequate credit to contributing scholars. Whitmore was stripped of his endowed chair and placed on administrative leave pending further review. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was more than I had dared expect. 2 years after sending that first email, I stood in the lobby of a small liberal arts college in Vermont, waiting to meet with the dean about a teaching position. It wasn't the career I had originally envisioned. I would never be a prominent researcher, never see my name on groundbreaking studies, but it was honest work that would allow me to make a difference in students' lives. The interview went well. The dean, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, had clearly done her research on my background. "I have to ask," she said near the end of our conversation, "do you regret what you did? The way you exposed Dr. Whitmore?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system didn't protect the people he hurt, but I don't regret doing what I thought was right. The dean nodded. "We need faculty who understand the importance of integrity. The position is yours if you want it." That evening, I called Dr. Kim to share the good news. My former mentor was doing better, working as a counselor at a community college and slowly rebuilding her relationship with education. "I'm proud of you, Doctor," Kim said, "not just for what you accomplished, but for how you've handled everything since. It would have been easy to become bitter." I thought about that conversation as I packed my apartment in preparation for the move to Vermont. Bitterness had been a constant temptation over the past 2 years. The academic career I had planned was gone. The future I had envisioned destroyed. Some nights, the weight of what I had sacrificed felt overwhelming. But I had also discovered something unexpected in the aftermath of my crusade against Whitmore. A sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement. The network of scholars who had reached out to me, the conversations about systemic problems in academia, the young researchers who now felt empowered to speak up about exploitation. These had given my actions a meaning beyond revenge. Margaret Foster had returned to school, earning a doctorate in adult education at age 58. She was now working on research that would finally give her the academic recognition that had been stolen from her decades earlier. "It's never too late to reclaim your voice," she had told me during our last conversation. Dr. Whitmore had quietly resigned from his position and retreated to a private consulting practice. His reputation was damaged, but not destroyed. The academic world had a way of forgetting scandals and rehabilitating fallen figures. I suspected he would emerge in a few years, perhaps at a smaller institution, and continue his career with more caution, but the same fundamental approach to others' work. The injustice of that still burned, but I had learned to live with incomplete victories. Change in institutional systems was slow and imperfect, measured in incremental progress rather than dramatic transformation. As I taped up the last box of my possessions, I found myself thinking about the student I had been 3 years earlier. Angry, determined, focused on revenge. That person had achieved what she set out to do, but the cost had been higher than either of us could have imagined. The Maya who was moving to Vermont was different. Still principled, still willing to fight for what was right, but tempered by experience and loss. I had learned that justice was more complex than simple retribution, that the price of doing right was often paid by the person who chose to act. But I had also learned that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory came at great personal cost. The students I would teach, the colleagues I would work with, the research culture I had helped to change, these were the true fruits of my patience and sacrifice. In the end, revenge had been less satisfying than I had expected. But the pursuit of justice, flawed and incomplete as it was, had given me something more valuable, a sense of integrity I could live with, a story I could be proud to tell. As I drove north toward my new life, I thought about the young researchers who would come after me, who might face their own moments of choice between silence and action. I hoped they would choose more wisely than I had, with less cost and more support. But if they found themselves in my position, if they discovered that the system they trusted was broken, and the mentors they admired were predators, I hoped they would remember my story. Not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of speaking truth to power, but as proof that one person, acting with patience and determination, could make a difference. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to choose. And that, I realized, was its own form of victory. 5 years later, I received an email from a graduate student at a prestigious university. The student had uncovered evidence that her advisor was appropriating research from international scholars whose work was less likely to be noticed in American academic circles. She was writing to ask for advice about what to do. I stared at the email for a long time, remembering my own confusion and anger when I had first discovered Dr. Whitmore's theft. The cycle was continuing, as I had known it would. The system remained imperfect, the powerful still preyed on the vulnerable, and young scholars still faced impossible choices between their careers and their principles. But something had changed. The student's email was one of dozens I had received over the years from researchers who now felt empowered to question authority, to document abuse, to speak up about exploitation. The network of support that had formed around my case had grown and evolved, creating resources and communities that hadn't existed when I was fighting my battle alone. I began typing my response, offering guidance and encouragement to another patient student preparing to challenge the system. The work was far from finished, but it was no longer mine to carry alone. Outside my office window, Vermont snow was beginning to fall, covering the campus in pristine white. I watched the flakes drift past my window and thought about the long journey that had brought me here, to this moment, to this chance to help someone else navigate the treacherous waters I had once crossed alone. It wasn't the revenge I had planned, but it was something better, a form of justice that lived and grew beyond my own need for retribution. And that, I realized, was worth all the sacrifice I had endured. The patient student had become the patient teacher, and the cycle continued, not of abuse, but of resistance, of hope, and of the slow, difficult work of making the world a little more just. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, do well to click like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more interesting revenge stories. See you on my next video. Bye.